holding hands in public. He called this tie signs. Now, funny story about hand holding in public. When I first dated my husband, it was the weirdest thing. I have never been a hand holder prior to meeting my husband. I was like, get sweaty. It just felt like restrictive. But when I first met my husband, we would be like in the store and he would hold my hand. And there was something so assuring about the way he would hold my hand. And 13 years later, him holding my hand just like feels like home to me. Hey, Mama. Welcome to the .This podcast, episode number 70. Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about how we sharpen our emotional communication skills and continue the conversations we've been having over the last few weeks in the relationships series. So what we are going to explore today is why is it important that we explore our emotional connections and how we communicate emotionally. We're going to talk about the steps to building emotional connection. We'll discuss how to name our feelings. We'll also kind of talk a little bit about why we don't express our feelings. Then we will dive into the emotional communication skills, which include nonverbal cues, facial expressions, reading movement and gestures, touch, and the value of the voice and words, and metaphors. We'll talk about listening skills and also how to become a better listener. So on this episode, what I want us to really focus on is how we can start building our own strengths that we already have, understanding the way we communicate. That way we can be better at communicating with other people, and we can understand how people communicate with us so we can have more insight in how we want to show up in our relationships so we can foster and build better relationships. So welcome to the episode. Hey, Mama. You deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the .This podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the .This podcast. So one of the things that's important to remember is that we typically start building our emotional skills for emotion connections early in infancy, right? Like when we first start to smile, when we're toddlers and we are being in our big feelings, we just continue to do that. And so childhood is really the center stage of how we learn to detect, convey, and respond to feelings. But that doesn't have to stop when we grow up, right? If we could continue to build these skills into our adulthood and beyond, we can really continue to hone on the skills and be better, and then also be able to teach them to our own kids. So I was thinking about something my husband said when my daughter was an infant, and it still makes me laugh now, but it was kind of not funny at the time. But it was the first time that she smiled at him, and she's probably a few weeks old, and he said to me, "Oh my God, it's like she's a real human now." And I was like, compared to what? She's been a human. But he basically said that in a way, he kind of felt like she had been a robot for a while. Like she didn't really respond to him. And so it was just nice when she just first started to show that nonverbal communication with him and foster that. And then over the years, now she's about to be 4 this summer and she's communicating more, obviously. And just seeing how that has evolved, I believe my biggest goal with teaching her how to communicate is to really help her understand her own emotional communication skills and mirror those for her so that as she continues to grow, we can exemplify that for her in our household. So some of the forms of emotional communication that we use to express ourselves include facial expressions, movement, gestures, touch, our tone of voice, descriptive words, and metaphors. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit in this a little later. But in the first thing I want to talk about is why does it matter that we understand and sharpen our emotional communication skills. One is, the saying that communication is key. So if we can sharpen these skills, we can foster better emotional communication. And the goal of this is twofold. One, it's so that we can become more aware of the way we may use these channels to express our own feelings. And second, to become more aware of the way those around us use them so we can recognize and respond to others' emotions during the bidding process. Because the more we understand these elements, the better we will become at bidding and responding to other people's bids in a meaningful way. And we may start to notice that we recognize simple communication problems that interfere with our ability to make bids. That way we can start improving our bids and make them clear the way we want them to be. And we may also learn to detect and respond to bids for connection that are hidden or obscured by people's anger or sadness. So doing so really will help us. Also, if we're starting new relationships, we can develop skills to start new relationships on a stable course. Now, I want to reiterate, the work of this series is based primarily on John Gottman's work in The Relationship Cure, the 5 steps. And so we are still working on these steps. I will again include the book link in the show notes. This is such an insightful book. It can be used to grow any relationships, friendship, dating, marriage, relationship with our kids, relationship with our coworkers, all the relationships. And one of the things that I've been so passionate about this spring in sharing this work is because it's work that I've been doing on my own to be showing up better in my relationships, helping my clients show up better in their relationships. And so I think that it's worth putting out in the world to share this meaningful work with other people so they too, you included, can really start to foster their own emotional communication skills. What are the steps to building emotional connection? One is recognizing feelings. The second is identifying them. And the third is demonstrating our understanding. In order for us to build better emotional connection, we should have to go through these steps, and then we can enhance these emotional communication skills in the way we discussed in the previous episodes, how we can start to understand our emotional heritage, how we can understand the way we bid for connection, all of that. So let's talk about naming feelings. If you listen to the episode about feeling our feelings, and I believe it's episode number 60, I talked about the work of understanding Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel. Some of the reasons that the Gottmans shared as far as why we should focus on our emotions, name them, and then talk about them is because naming them engages a part of our brain that controls the functions of logic and language. So when you identify and name a feeling and give it a name, you get a better control, a sense of control over them, and it can help you really start to cope with negative emotions like fear, anger, sadness, frustration, disappointment, all of that. Second, when we name our feelings and talk about them, it can help us connect with other people. Because here's the thing, people around us can't know for certain what we're feeling unless we tell them. So relationships, how we grow in relationships is when we help another person to name his or her emotions. So let's say your friend says, my favorite aunt just died. If you say, that must be very sad for you, that means that you're showing that you understand your friend's experience, and that creates a ground for emotional connection. If you think that exploring emotions in analytical, scientific, mathematical way is strange, it can be very strange if you're an intuitive person, but just be aware that there are people who exploring and understanding feelings doesn't come easy for them. And for those people, what benefits them is to really name the feeling and kind of have a relationship with understanding the feeling so they can connect with it better. So why do we not express our feelings? And I've talked about this in previous episodes, but I wanted to share John Gottman's perspective of this and kind of my own understanding of how he said it. So when we think about negative emotions like sadness, anger, fear, disappointment, frustration, we may try to avoid or deny these negative experiences because we want to keep our distance from the things that are upsetting. So, of course, if we're talking about joy and contentment, those things do create blissful emotions and emotions we want to feel all the time. But remember, part of the human experience is feeling all the feelings. So if we deny ourselves the opportunity to really be in the emotional dimension of understanding ourselves, we may be doing ourselves a disservice, right? The other thing is if we continue to put a positive spin on events, so this is like the toxic positivity, we may actually find ourselves believing that we don't have to think about things that make us sad, angry, scared, disappointed, and frustrated. But it's just a false belief because, again, the human experience involves the entire kaleidoscope of experiences. Or sometimes we may feel ashamed or embarrassed by how we're feeling, and we don't want to let other people into that experience. The other thing that I know for myself, and I've experienced it coaching my clients too, is sometimes people believe that we don't want to burden our friends and family and loved ones with our emotional matters. And in fact, that is far from the truth because they may not consider it a burden if we share with them how we're experiencing life and what we're going through. Sometimes we may also believe that our feelings don't matter and they don't deserve the attention of others because they may be too upsetting for others to bear. In addition, some people are so used to not being able to express their emotions that they can't find the words to say what's happening. And some simply just value their privacy, so they're not really willing to be vulnerable and reveal how they're feeling. But just because you conceal your feelings or people around you that you're close to don't express their feeling, it doesn't mean that their emotions don't show. So let's start digging into the different ways in which we communicate. Nonverbal cues is the first thing that we're going to talk about. And there have been studies that show that most people actually trust nonverbal cues more than they trust another person's words. It may be important for us to kind of consciously understand how people express emotion through words, facial expression, tone of voice, and so on, because we can see the subtle cues that they pass back and forth as they bid and respond to another person's bids for connection. When we have this heightened awareness, we can then ensure that the messages we send through our body language match the messages we're sending using our words and spoken language. We can also avoid sending mixed messages or maybe unwittingly discouraging interaction because we can improve our ability to recognize, interpret, and respond to emotional cues that other people convey to us. Facial expressions is one of the ways that we may communicate nonverbally. So, research by Charles Darwin actually showed that people worldwide use the same facial expressions to communicate certain emotions. So, what Darwin first did is he wanted to explore the evolution of facial expression. So he asked missionaries, he sent questionnaires to missionaries who were going to remote parts of the world. And he just basically wanted to know, like, what did the local people, how did they act when they were happy, sad, angry, and so forth. And what the research showed was that people across cultures use and recognize the same facial expressions for happiness, fear, anger, surprise, contempt, and disgust. And of course, there are some exceptions, but like overall, it was kind of the same sentiment as far as facial expressions. I want you to think, like, when I say the word surprise, what visually in your mind comes up, like the facial expression of surprise? Or contempt, like it might be like the nose turned upward. It could be just like the narrowing of the eyes. Those kind of things have some very universal commonalities and similarities. So although we have that awareness, right, we also remember that cultural differences do exist, and also people can express emotions in their own unique ways. And so the only way to really find out how a person is feeling is to actually engage with them, right? And engage with them in a sensitive way and discuss their experiences with them. One of the key points that was shared in the book was points to keep in mind as you improve your ability to read emotions through facial expressions. One is to get familiar with a person's face in its most neutral state. And this reminds me, when I was in elementary school, I had a classmate and he had some sort of facial surgery in his childhood that had kind of left the right side of his face like almost like his lower lip on the right side was like turned down. So he kind of always looked like he was maybe not annoyed. Like I can't even express the expression. But he was like one of the happiest people and he was super friendly. And so when I think about like that context of just knowing what a person's natural state looks like, we may recognize that some people do have like that natural expression. It's like when we say like somebody has an RBF, right? A resting bitch face. Like sometimes people just do have that facial expression where they do look annoyed all the time or they're not maybe smiling all the time. And if we get to know them, then we know that's their natural state. The other thing to remember is that people often feel more than one emotion at once. Going back to what I said earlier, don't misinterpret permanent physical features as fleeting emotional expressions. So, which leads to the next point, which is take time to look. Because skilled observation takes vigilance. And if you can carefully observe, you can tell whether two people are aligned in their feelings or just pretending to be. So just practice awareness of how you're reading people's facial expressions. Number 2 is reading movement and gestures. So although facial expressions really are the first thing that we see when we look for emotional information, feelings can also be detected in the way people use other parts in their body. So you can just notice their posture and how they're reacting. Are they leaning in to talk to you? Are they pulling back? Are they crossing their arms? Those little expressions may help us sometimes. Like, are they like, shoving their hands in front of us? Like, are they trying to like, okay, I don't want to hear anything you have to say anymore? That type of thing. The third thing is touch. So just, if you think about like the space is important between us, the bridges that we build across that space through touch are also important. And touch can be a very important tool in bidding and responding to the bids that other people extend us to connect with. It can convey underlying channels of feelings in so many situations. Studies have shown that touching and being touched can have a tremendous impact on our feelings of health and well-being. And it's an important way for two people to signal to others that they're attached. So there's a behavior type that Irving Goffman called behaviors like, holding hands in public. He called this tie signs. Now, funny story about hand holding in public. When I first dated my husband, it was the weirdest thing. I have never been a hand holder prior to meeting my husband. I was like, get sweaty. It just felt like restrictive. But when I first met my husband, we would be like in the store and he would hold my hand. And there was something so assuring about the way he would hold my hand. And 13 years later, him holding my hand just like feels like home to me. And I don't mean to like sound cliche, but like we'll be driving in the car and he'll just like reach for my hand and hold it. And in that moment, like I know I'm home. It's almost like the reminder, like this is home. This is where my heart belongs. Apparently, it's also a tie sign. So again, remember that touching norms can differ according to age, gender, religion, profession, or other characteristics. So if you have an awareness of the norms, then you can follow them to fit in more easily, to mix and socialize without drawing unusual attention to yourself. The key reminder here is that touch is powerful and it can have an impact on people, and it could also have a negative impact on people. So when you touch someone, it's very important that you have awareness of the message that your touch may convey. And ask yourself, is this touch likely to strengthen the relationship or to weaken it? I remember when I was in training, there was an anesthesiologist that we worked with that made me so uncomfortable. And he would rub your shoulder. And it was just like, it just left me very squeamish. And I just like, when I think about that person, it just makes me like kind of like feel ill. Like, why would he do that? Like, he would just like pat our shoulders or rub our backs. And I guess he would do it with the guys too. So I don't even know like if it was of a sexual nature, but it was very, very uncomfortable. Sometimes somebody can touch you in a way that leaves you feeling very confused or is very unclear. And so one of the suggestions that the Gottmans offered is to ask yourself about the source of your confusion. And these questions might include the following. Does this person feel warmly towards me? Is this touch affectionate, comforting, friendly, sexual, pleasant, aggressive, or threatening? Is this touch meant to control me? Do I like to be touched this way? Does this touch make me feel uneasy? And would I want to be touched by this person in this way again? So going back to this person, it did not make me feel good. It made me feel uneasy. And I would never, ever want to be touched by a colleague in the way that he it just makes me nauseous to even think about it. So trust your feelings and talk to the other person if you're in a position to do it, and just express how their touch maybe comes across. Because maybe they don't know. Maybe they're clueless, and maybe they've lost the cultural context of the way they're touching you, and now it feels super uncomfortable. So number 4 is the voice and words. And one of the things is that our voices provide people who are listening with a wealth of emotional information. Some of our emotional signals include the changes in pitch, rate, and volume at which we talk. According to research by psychologist Klaus Scherer, our voice pitch goes up for a majority of people when they're feeling angry or fearful. And the voice moves from what he calls the chest register, which is low, relaxed, and resonant, to the head register, which is higher and more tense. And so speech may become louder and faster. But interestingly, if a person is a fast speaker, his or her speech may slow down when they're mad or scared. And sadness is harder to detect in the voice than anger and fear. So I think it's interesting because I know that I speak pretty fast, or I assume that I speak pretty fast. Sometimes when I listen to the podcast, I'm like, I sound like I speak slow. But I have been told by many people that I speak really, really fast. When I am upset and I'm angry, I definitely slow down the way I speak. I am very deliberate in each word that I express, because I realize then when I'm angry that my brain is moving faster than my mouth, and I do want to slow it down. And I don't know if I have sensed that, the emotion that the difference between my sadness and anger in my voice. But I will say that when I'm sad, I obviously speak less when I'm sad, and I don't really express it in my voice. But anger, it is very obvious when I'm angry, because one, my voice gets shaky. It's very obvious to me, that I'm speaking differently. If you want to use your voice to communicate your feelings more clearly, pay close attention to the way your pitch, rate, and voice change as you speak. And remember that when you speak in a slow monotone, it doesn't foster interest. So one of the things, and they talk about if you vary your pitch and your rate and your volume in ways that emphasize the points you want to make, you'll be a more interesting speaker, and you'll have a better shot at connecting with others on an emotional level. So I just thought about that as I was recording the new intro and outro of the podcast. And my podcast producer, Cassidy, was very intentional about how I wanted to come across, speaking to a new listener, speaking to you that's been listening for a long time, inviting you in to just sit across, the room with me, and let's talk like friends. And how does that come across, in audio where you can't see me? And Cassidy did such a good job of literally making me repeat and visualizing okay, you have this mama, she's overwhelmed, and she's just finding your podcast for the first time. How do you want her to feel by the way you speak? The rate at which you speak, the tone, your pitch, how do you really want to invite her in? And I will say that after we recorded, and we recorded a whole lot, when I listened to the final product, I was yes, that is exactly how I wanted to convey how I was showing up. And also, I know that I can be very abrupt in my speech, and I can be very to the point. And one of the things that has helped me, even with my own coaching practice, is to just pause and listen to my own voice as I'm speaking to my client, to notice when I'm not connecting emotionally with my voice to my client. When am I not speaking to my client? Number 6 is metaphors. So when we think about metaphors, I want you to think about, I'm going to say a couple, and I just want to have you think what comes up in your mind. When someone says, life is a highway, or he's a shining star, or she's an early bird, right? What comes up for you? Because one of the things is that a metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two unlike things without using like or as. For example, saying, her cheeks were roses, right? Or, like, chaos is a friend of mine. And or the relationship was a train wreck. Like, what comes up for you when you hear that? Like, think about if somebody is communicating with you using metaphors. Like, when we use metaphors, sometimes we can be communicating something that maybe the other person can't clearly see, but then we say it and they're like, oh, right? Because just as the voice provides clues to what's happening in our hearts, so do the metaphors we choose. So again, many of us learned about metaphors in high school literature and, or poetry class. I think about, like, for me, like, I think about this metaphor, which is a song by Paul Simon, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. And, like, I'm pretty sure she didn't have any diamonds on the soles of her shoes, but, like, it makes me think, like, like, he starts, like, she's a rich girl. Oh, yeah. He says, he's a poor boy, empty as a pocket. And, like, when I think about metaphors for me, and the ones that I usually choose to use, they're very, like, decorated. And a lot of them are very colloquial because I, spent half of my life speaking the Queen's English. And, we had to learn a lot of them because, it was kind of like testing. We were tested on them. And so sometimes, like, I notice, like, some of the, metaphors I use may not be very relatable when I'm speaking maybe to an American friend, but then I'll say the same thing to a friend that I grew up with in Kenya and they totally get it. So again, the metaphors that we choose to use sometimes do represent our emotional heritage and, like, how we choose to use words and the spoken word to express how we're feeling in that moment. So when people use metaphors as simple figures of speech, the imagery they choose can provide little windows into their emotional realities. And especially when people use metaphors to draw parallels between their current lives and what happened in the past, these metaphors can open entire doors into the kind of emotional heritage issues. Some of you have heard me talk about me before, like saying I'm a trauma sandwich. And now I kind of use that, like, as, funny, but I think about it like I was born in between very traumatic phases of my parents' marriage. And so when I think about a sandwich, like, there's the in-between, which is the thing we want, and then the outside, maybe not so fun, like the bread. But it does give you insight on my own emotional heritage and, like, how I related my childhood into my present life. When we use metaphors, sometimes they can be a tool that we use to bid and respond to other people's bids for emotional connections. Like, maybe we're not trying to say the thing that's happening. Like, we could be like, my life is a train wreck right now. And maybe we're trying to say, like, I'm really struggling and things are not going as planned and, falling off the rails, and using that to express ourselves. I will say that one of the metaphors that kind of now annoys me, because I used to use it all the time, is like when you say you've fallen off the wagon. And I forget how, like, I think it was a friend of mine that shared this with me. And he was like, when you say you're falling off the wagon, you're basically, like, saying you're not in charge of your life. And I was like, oh. He goes, yeah, you can't fall off the wagon if you're driving the wagon. So that's one that I don't routinely use. Just wanted to share that. So number 7, we're going to talk, and this is the last portion of the podcast today, we're going to talk about listening. While it's important for us to understand metaphors and all the various forms of nonverbal communication, and they can boost our ability to connect with others, right? We can't get far without a strong foundation of good basic listening skills. And for me, one of the things I've really been intentional about is building my listening skills, because I just noticed for myself, especially as I expanded into coaching, like, I needed to be such a good listener and practice, like, understanding people and asking good questions, so that I could, like, really, really connect. And so, when you think about having good listening skills and how they can help you in social situations, they can also be important in building rapport with other people. So I'm going to give you some tips for becoming a better listener based on, again, from the book, The Relationship Cure. I'm going to give you 9 tips for becoming a better listener. Number one is based on the counsel that Dale Carnegie offered in his 1937 classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this is the idea of focusing on being interested, not being interesting. Because when you think about it, at the heart of who we are as human beings, we want to feel valued and appreciated. And if you think about how we can connect, and if we pay sincere attention to the details of another person's life, like it really, really gets us to connecting. Number two is start by asking questions. And not asking the type of questions that have simple one-word answers, but really asking intentional questions that allow people to express their feelings and to elaborate. So one of the questions that I really love to ask my clients is, what is coming up for you? And that way they can just know that I'm holding space for them to express how they feel and to really see their minds from the outside looking in. But when I ask them those questions, I'm offering them the opportunity to really express themselves and share without any mini agenda. It's just literally me wanting to know what is in your mind. Number three is asking questions about people's goals and visions of the future. Because if we ask these questions out of curiosity and a goal of connecting, we can really have an insight on what makes people happy. What are their insights? What is success to them? What brings them joy? What is meaningful work? If we ask these questions from a place of intention and curiosity, we can connect so much better than when we just don't express interest in the goals and visions of the future for other people. Number four is looking for commonalities. And today I had an experience that kind of reminded me of that. So, which is no pun intended here because we're talking about listening. But I had a patient, I asked him a question and he made this joke. He says, I was told I couldn't hear women and children. And I was like, what does that mean? He goes, well, the real truth is I'm very hard of hearing. And he was a younger patient. He goes, I'm very hard of hearing. And I go, well, that's interesting. And I go, my best friend suffered hearing loss and she now wears a hearing aid and she's very intent on creating advocacy and awareness around the idea of hearing loss in young people. And he was like, wow, really? Tell me about it. So when we found this commonality, we had this long conversation. And out of that conversation, I actually came out with so much insight because he shared with me an amazing resource for affordable hearing aids. And I was able to share that resource with my best friend because she lives in Kenya. She's trying to build this awareness and outreach for people with hearing loss. And I was like, this can be a resource that you can share with people who maybe just think getting a hearing aid is out of reach. I mean, the cost of hearing aids is so prohibitive for many people, even in the United States. We're talking $5,000 to $8,000. That is another podcast episode for another day. But I just thought the idea of commonality in listening to other people and engaging with them from a place of interest can bring so much connection with people who maybe we wouldn't have had deeper intentional conversations with because we're meeting them for the first time and we don't have a lot of time to connect. Number five is to tune in with all your attention and be in awareness when you are not being mindful. Number six is responding with an occasional brief nod or sound. So that can look like having a conversation with somebody and they're talking, and you're maybe not able to talk in the midst of it, just showing them that you're still following, that you're still tracking, and that you're still interested in what they have to say. Number seven, from time to time, paraphrase what the speaker says. I cannot tell you how valuable this is, especially in my coaching practice, when I reflect back to my clients or to the person I'm talking to what they're saying, because it helps them realize that we are still talking, we're still communicating, that I hear them, and this is how I'm understanding what it is that they're saying to me. Number eight is maintaining the right amount of eye contact. But I want to say this with a caveat, is to have awareness of the cultural and social norms of the amount of eye contact that you're creating with the person that you're talking to. Last but not least is let go of your agenda, because it's hard to be a good listener when you're struggling to direct the outcome of a conversation. I just want you to notice in conversations when you're not showing up in curiosity, or you're attached to the meaning of the conversation, or you want to get something out of the conversation, you're less likely to connect. So I just want you to be in awareness when you're speaking to your partner, you're speaking to your kid. Show interest, show awareness, And I just thought about something about the point of like tuning in and just like paraphrasing and asking questions that don't have like simple yes or no questions. This has been so interesting in with my daughter. Like I'll say, hey, how was school? And she'll say, fine. But if I ask her, so who did you play with today on the playground? And what games did you play? Then we can have like a full-on conversation. And so just imagine in your own marriage when your spouse comes home and then you say, how was your day? And they're like, it was fine. Versus like, oh, like, what did you work on at work today? Hey, what did you have for lunch? Like, just showing interest in the, maybe to you, they're not important details of their lives, but maybe they are important details to them, right? Like connecting from that space of, I want to know more about what's going on with you. Like, sometimes my husband will ask me like to tell him about the cases that I did, and he's not in medicine. Like, it is funny now because my daughter will tell me like, how many patients did you have today? And like, what did you do? And I'm like, oh, okay, she's listening to my husband asking her. So I just wanted to share those tips to help you be a better listener, because I know that that is a skill set that many of us need to work on, me included, me very included. And I just wanted to share that for all of us to have awareness and to practice connecting with each other. So this Saturday, June 4th, we are going to be having the Mommy Makeover Mindset Relationship Makeover Edition. I would love for you to join me. I have about 140 women registered to attend, so it's going to be epic. I would love to have you there. So if you haven't registered, go to stethoscopes.com/events or click on the direct registration link that's going to be in the show notes. I hope to see you there. Also, I wanted to tell you guys, after this series is over, I will be interviewing my husband on the podcast. We are going to be it's going to be a Father's Day edition. So I'm excited to have him on the podcast. Hopefully he doesn't change his mind, but he's pretty much on board right now. So very exciting. I want us to talk about fatherhood from his standpoint. Of course, I can't talk to you about fatherhood. I'm not a father. And one of the things that reminded me of that, that I really wanted to interview for him for the Father's Day edition is because I was watching him interacting with Bella yesterday, my daughter, and they were playing. She comes up with all these games, and she's like, let's play Rapunzel. Let's play Goldilocks. And poor man was pretending to be Goldilocks for like 5 minutes. So she comes in the house, and like he's Goldilocks. So he comes in the house, and he like tries out the chairs and the porridge and the bed. And then she comes home as the mommy bear. It was so funny. But it really like made me laugh and warmed my heart so much because I'm like, this poor man has to deal with these games that she comes up with, and he's such a good sport about it. And yeah, I just like wanted to like have him on the podcast so I could also tell him what amazing dad he is, and I could hear from his experience from a very curious place, like what is his fatherhood experience and what tips does he have for all the dads out there. So this one's going to be for all of you, for your husbands, for yourselves. Cannot wait to interview my hubby. It's going to be fun. I cannot wait. So if you have not left us a review of the podcast, please, 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 we appreciate any effort to get us to the ears of other mamas just like you. And the only way to do that is to like boost the podcast on Apple so that Apple can send it to other people, suggest it to other people, and they can get the podcast in their ears. Also, I want to thank you for being an amazing listener, because thanks to you, we, and I mean you and me and Cassidy, my podcast producer, thanks to you, we have had over 11,000 downloads of the podcast, 70 episodes in, and I don't take that for granted. That means 11,000 times somebody's in the world have listened to this podcast. So truly appreciate you. Truly appreciate your listening and all your tips and all the messages that you send me about the impact that this podcast has had in your life. It means the world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We did it. Keep sharing this with your friends. Keep showing up. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for your time. Have a great week. Remember, you are enough and you're worthy of love and belonging. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.